Okay, so I'm Melissa Mischka, and I'm going to be talking about developing young children's scientific reasoning through participation in joint activities. So, as a little bit of background, there's a lot of research that's been done in early childhood in regards to literacy. However, there has not been a very large focus on mathematical and scientific development in young children, and so that's really an area that's lacking. However, that's really worrying because mathematical knowledge at the age of school entry is actually the strongest predictor of later school achievement, so it's something that really should be getting a little bit more attention. Also, a lot of the research has not been done in the home context, and as we know, children learn at home through informal activities with their parents, and so that's where a lot of that learning happens with 4- and 5-year-old children. So this early on, that's a really important context to be looking at. And so one kind of questioning method used in science education is known as inquiry processes, and so there's 3 main points with these processes. And the first is to encourage children to observe, question, predict, evaluate, and compare. And they can do this with everything in their everyday environment. And something that parents can do is use phrases such as "I notice" and "I wonder," and that can really help children notice things in their environment and really pick up on that. The second point is that children love to ask questions, and so when they're encouraged to ask questions and to actually investigate their own answers, then they're able to develop problem-solving skills and feel in charge of their own learning. And the third point is to guide their discovery by giving them time. So with time, they can kind of investigate and think about their own questions. And so parents can do this by asking questions such as why and how to really develop that more complex thinking there. And again, using those phrases, "I notice" and "I wonder" are helpful. So this inquiry method that is being used in some places has been found to relate to the concepts, language, and the processes of science. And so again, the intent here is not just to convey the content knowledge of science, but actually those processes that get children learning. You know, I make a prediction, I have to test that prediction, and then I can make a generalization. And so it has been found that in a preschool classroom, children can be taught to observe, predict, check, and record, and they begin to use this language. This method is also very popular in formal science education in later elementary and middle grades. And so it's something that we see in the school system, but again, that research has been done with those older age groups, not necessarily with preschoolers. We have also found in other research that by asking the right types of questions, you can encourage students to investigate things going on in their everyday environments, and so it is possible. So the important part that we wanted to look at was really how parents can help with that, because as I said, not a lot of research has been done in the home context. And so it's been assumed that parents use a content-driven interaction style rather than an inquiry-based approach when supporting their children's science learning. And so what this means is that, for example, if a parent and child are walking and taking a nature walk, if you're using a content-driven interaction style, you might be focused on labeling the different types of plants you see. However, if you're using an inquiry-based interaction style, you might pick up that your child seems interested in a pine cone, and so you ask questions about that pine cone. Oh, well, what do you think it's used for by the animals? Where did it come from? And really kind of get those questions going. However, again, this is an assumption, and there's no actual research that we found that examines that premise. But there has been research that has demonstrated that early home numeracy practices are correlated with later math achievement, but not a lot is known right now about how parents really support that early math, and especially not that early science development in the home context. And so our research was kind of designed to fill that gap. So the 2 main questions that we asked were, what types of scientific thinking do young children demonstrate when joining in an activity with a parent? And also, what types of adult guidance best facilitate children's scientific thinking? And how effective is it to educate the parents on the use of this inquiry guidance? So we had 28 families in our study, and this included 28 4- and 5-year-old children. There were 11 girls and 17 boys whose average age was about 56 months. And then we had 1 parent per family participating, which was 24 mothers and 4 fathers. Each of these parent-child dyads were randomly assigned to an inquiry training group or a control group, which were counterbalanced for sex and age. And so in the control group, we didn't give any kind of instructions about how to interact and how to guide their child in activities that we asked them to do. However, in the inquiry training group, we gave them a handout explaining these processes, and also had them watch a 5-minute video that was used video samples from a local preschool that uses this kind of inquiry-based approach. And so again, those 3 key ideas were encouraging the children to observe, question, predict, evaluate, and compare, and then to have them asking questions and investigating their own answers by giving them time. And then the third idea is to follow the child's interest and ask those open-ended questions such as why and how. So we conducted 2 interviews with each of these dyads, and at the initial interview, we would train the parents in the inquiry training group using that handout in that video. And then we asked all the parent-child dyads to complete a paw print matching activity in which they were given, as you can see here, a book and pictures of animals that correlated with pictures of paw prints. And they were asked, they could use the book as a resource to kind of match up these animals with the paw prints. And then we left them for 4 weeks, and we left them with a packet of activities that they were asked to complete 2 activities per week. And again, the parents in the inquiry training group were asked to use that approach when doing these activities. And we also left the materials for these activities to be done. And then again, 4 weeks later at the final interview, we asked all of the dyads to complete a seed sorting activity where they were given about a dozen different types of seeds and asked to separate them based on some attribute of their choice. So each of these interviews was video recorded and then later transcribed. And we went through and coded for a few overarching themes. So the first one being scientific thinking and discovery. So as you can see here, most of these were coded for either the child giving a response or the parent guiding in that way. And so an example might be for observation, that a child says they spontaneously note that their footprint is small that they just found. And so those would be those kinds of codings. And we also had some coding that was only for children. So for instance, the spontaneous predicting and evaluating. So kind of as a comparison, for predicting, a child might say, I think this is a watermelon seed. However, for a spontaneous predicting and evaluating, they would say something like, I think this is a watermelon seed because it looks like a small green watermelon. So they kind of explain their thought process there. And then again, with the evaluating code, it was only given to parent guidance. And so that might be a parent asking, well, why do you think that? Or how do you think that works? So trying to get them to explain themselves. We also coded for strategies, and that could be maybe using a magnifying glass and whether the child or the parent suggested that. We also coded for the inquiry exchanges and counted the number of these. And those were characterized by those 3 main points that I explained earlier about the approach. And then lastly, we looked at the activity interaction style. So whether it was really the child directed it or the parent directed it, or whether it was a combination of both. So here in these 2 charts, all of these were found to be statistically significant. And that's shown here by the asterisks indicating what level, either the 0.05, 0.01, or 0.001 level. And so the means in these charts indicate how many times each code was present in both activities put together, so the total time of both activities. And so to kind of give you a more visual, this here is the parent guidance codes. And so in blue, you can see the inquiry training group, and in red is the control group. So kind of some of the really exciting things were that for inquiry exchanges, parents in the inquiry training group were about 6 times more likely to have an inquiry exchange where they kind of have that child doing that more complex thinking. They were also about 4 times more likely to ask prediction questions and ask their child to make a prediction. And then also they were 3 times as likely to ask them to evaluate their prediction, so why or how. And then here you can see the child codes. And so again, in blue is the inquiry training group, and red is control. And they were twice as likely to make an observation about something in their environment or something in the activity. And something else was that they were 3 times as likely to make a prediction. And again, with the spontaneous prediction evaluation, they were 4 times as likely. And so even though that is a small amount, it was much more often in the inquiry training group, which was something that was very important and an important difference that we found. So here we have a video example of a parent in the inquiry training group, and they are finding a duck footprint. Oh. If the volume will work. Oh. Okay. Okay, well, I'm not going to waste time by trying to figure out the volume, but basically the parent allows the child to pick the wrong footprint. He picks a bird footprint, and he, kind of asks, well, where have you seen a duck footprint before? And he says, oh, by the Elon pond. And so she's getting him to think about where he sees it and why he thinks that's a good footprint and whether it would be good for a duck to swim with that footprint. And then later on in the activity, they do find that that is not a duck's footprint, and they end up picking out the correct answer. So some of the conclusions that we were able to draw from this is that inquiry-based guidance is an effective approach when prompting children to demonstrate more complex thinking. So again, a great example of that is that spontaneous predicting and evaluating. Another finding that we had is that parents in the control group really gave the children more answers than the parents in the inquiry training group. And so a suggestion for that would be when a parent is working with a child, they should really worry less about giving the answers and giving that content and really focus more on asking those questions that would provoke the child's thinking. And then one other conclusion is that it was important to find that parents are able to adapt a new style because a lot of these parents hadn't used the style before. And it is important to note that it took practice, it took time for them to become comfortable. So these are two quotes pulled out from the final interview when we were talking with the parents. And so one parent was quoted saying that the inquiry method certainly demanded more resources than a less intentional approach, but I think any intentional approach, whether it be inquiry or some other intentional method, would be effortful. And another parent was quoted saying, I was comfortable using the inquiry method, I just had to pace myself to give her time to answer, because as a grown-up we are trained to answer, spit it out quick. The harder part was like, just take your time, give her time, and let her connect it. And so this was a really important thing that the parents were able to adopt that new style, even though it did take a little bit of time to become comfortable with it and for the child to become comfortable with that parent asking those questions. So that's the end of mine.